My speech will start in 3.
Please, this is the fourth round of the Campionato Italiano Giovanile di Debate in the English version. And the motion to be discussed today is this House would require all foods already on the market to undergo the European safety assessment currently mandated for novel foods. I won't read the info because you perfectly know that. So the debate can start. I invite the first speaker, Martina, to give the first speech. Go. 3, 2, 1.
Go. Hello, I'm the first speaker, Prop, and today we will discuss the motion this House would require all foods already on the market to undergo the European safety assessment currently mandated for novel foods. We would never allow a drug, a toy, or an airplane to be sold without modern safety testing, yet we do exactly that with almost everything we eat. According to EU laws, there are 2 types of food. Novel foods, any food that was not consumed in the EU before the 15th of May 1997, and traditional foods, basically all other foods. According to EU regulation, these 2 types of food have different levels of safety assessment. For novel foods, a European safety assessment is mandatory before they can be placed on the market. The European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, conducts the scientific risk assessment to evaluate whether a food is safe for consumption. Then the European Commission and Member States decide on authorization. The burden of proof and the cost of such assessments lie with the applicant company, and marketing without this authorization is illegal. For traditional foods instead, the system flips from pre-market authorization to ex-post control. In short, they are presumed safe unless evidence shows otherwise. But why does this difference exist? Simply for bureaucratic reasons, because of course no one can argue that a food produced in 1996 is inherently safer than the ones produced in 1997. It's simply that before 1997 there was no centralized European food safety system. The status quo is deeply problematic. In fact, we will show this from 3 points of analysis. Health concerns. Following the actual system, the majority of food that we eat today has never been tested according to modern scientific standards, and this is problematic for 2 reasons. In the years before 1997, there was no assessments on nanoparticles, endocrine disruptions, and epigenetic effects and cumulative exposures to hundreds of additives. So even if according to science nowadays, we deem those things unsafe, traditional foods still use them and we still eat them. For traditional foods, we can test them only after someone has had health issues and only if those health issues could be legally linked exclusively to that food. We'll explain this better in the first argument. Then we have lack of consumer trust. We have scandal after scandal about unsafe food, and this on the long run affects consumer trust, which also affects the economy of the whole food chain, as we'll see in the second argument. And then we have regulatory injustice and unfair competitiveness. If we understand that the only big difference between those types of foods is the year they were produced, we understand our regulatory difference and the different standards are unfair and bring to a different level of competitiveness, and we will show this in the third argument. So how do we intend to solve these problems? We have to understand the mechanism already existing for novel foods to all foods, even traditional ones. We do understand how assessing the safety of all the existing food contemporarily is unrealistic. So we have 2 points on that. We want to take the already existing division done by the EFSA between high, moderate, and low risk foods, and start by conducting safety assessment on high risk foods, then moderate, and lastly the low risk ones. And we will give a total deadline for the assessment of all traditional foods of 5 years. Our timeline will deal with the positive aspects of our model in 3 arguments. Firstly, our model assures that all food consumed is healthy. Then it taps into customer trust, helping the economy of the food chain. And our model drives innovation and levels the fields for all companies. So in the first argument, we are saying that mandatory safety assessment assures that all foods consumed is healthy. In fact, a system that protects you only if you can prove that you're sick before consuming one specific food. is not a health system. It's a legal lottery. Most people will always lose. And if we look at EU data, we can see that from the total of foods, only 2,000 are considered novel foods, which is less than 3% of total foods. So only 3% of the food we eat is ensured to be safe, while the rest of the 95% of foods is controlled only if reasonable doubt of safety arises. This is problematic for two reasons. Authority can only intervene when there is reasonable suspicion of risk, based on observed harm in population. But reasonable suspicion requires many people getting sick with the same pattern and linked to the same problem. So one person getting sick is not enough. Even hundreds may not be enough. That guarantees that there is high exposure before intervention and irreversible damage for many consumers. Even after people get sick, you still must prove that this food caused this illness. But in reality, diet is multifactorial. We know that people eat dozens of ingredients per day across many meals from main producer. So it's difficult to say that this illness was caused by this food. And then most food harm is not acute and developed across years. And not even on the same day. By the time the disease appears, the exposure happened a long time ago. So the impact is that basically people have health problems and near nothing is done to make sure that this doesn't happen again. To show this, let's look at some data. Member states conducted 5 million official food safety inspections and investigations in 2022. Only 7% of those cases were followed up with a full investigation by the EFSA. Of that 7% subset, only 10% found a strong enough causal link between a specific food and a specific health outcome to trigger formal assessment. Moreover, we have some examples. In fact, trans fats were consumed for decades and considered safe until long-term epidemiological studies linked them to cardiovascular disease. By the time regulation catch up, millions of people had already been exposed. So how will we solve these problems? We shift protection from exposed to ex ante by subjecting foods that are already on the market to the same scientific scrutiny applied to novel foods. So regulator access to toxicity, long-term effects, and impacts on vulnerable populations such as children and the elderly. We have two main impacts. First, public health. A pre-market assessment regime will detect toxicity before foods are widely consumed, reduce long-term chronic disease burden, protect vulnerable population, so as we said, the children, the elderly, the immunocompromised, who are constantly currently exposed without review, without any protection. So in our system, there is prevention. There isn't a late intervention. We don't wait for the damage to show before we act. We prevent. So we protect our population. We protect the EU citizens. And then we have an effect on health justice. In fact, our current system privileges those with resources that can mount legal cases. By contrast, our mandatory assessments protect everyone before the harm happens, not after the harm is proven. This will benefit the general population as well as, we will say later, our economy and the whole food market. And because of this, us as the Pop Squad are proud to say that we want to propose this motion. And with this, I end my speech.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for your speech, which lasted 7 minutes 35 seconds. Okay, now please, I invite to give your speech and take the field, Sophie Varga. When you're ready, please. Sophie, your microphone is closed. Your microphone, activate your microphone. I cannot activate your microphone. You should.
Sophie, your microphone. Your microphone.
Okay.
Does it work now? Okay,
That's okay.
Thank you. There was a problem with my computer.
That's it. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Go.
Yes. I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Sophie Rebecca Varga, and I am part of the opposition team, which strongly opposes the requirement that all foods already on the market should undergo the European Novel Food Safety Assessment. Speaker one from the other team gave us the context of the motion as something that will benefit our safety, but I would disagree because putting this regulation on every single food wouldn't ensure our safety, and I will exactly talk about in my argument why this wouldn't ensure safety and wouldn't let us have any economic benefits. So this debate is not about whether food safety matters. Of course it does. The real question is how food safety should be ensured and whether it is reasonable to retroactively force existing foods into a regulatory framework that was never designed for such logistical and economic issues. Now, the Novel Food Regulation EU 2015-2283 was created to assess foods without a history of safe use. In practice, this means foods that were not consumed in the European Union before 1997. The motion proposes to extend this framework to foods that have been safely consumed for decades or even centuries and that are already regulated under strict EU food law. Our timeline is based on one core value, proportionality. Effective regulation must be risk-based, evidence-driven, and targeted. Blanket regulation does not increase safety, it undermines it. The opposition team will show that this policy fails for 3 reasons. First, it causes disproportionate economic harm with no safety gain. Second, it leads to the regulatory elimination of traditional and cultural foods. And third, it drives the food production into the black market. I will present the first argument, Speaker 2, Sophie Bisso, will present the second and third arguments, and Speaker 3, Sara Guarino, will refute the proposition and conclude the debate. First, I would like to refute the first speaker's speech. Now, the first speaker said that we wouldn't have any safety testing if we wouldn't put this novel regulation in every single food. But I would heavily disagree because there are already numerous other regulations, even stated in the Novel Foods Regulation, that clearly state that every single food is controlled by another regulation. For example, the general regulation controls food on a vast level. Food that enters our country and any country in the EU, European Union, has to get controlled and assessed by European safety standards. Otherwise, they wouldn't let those foods get imported in our countries. And it also applies to food production inside, because when you have a company, whether agriculture or not, you have to apply for these safety assessments and you have to apply to be controlled in these safety assessments. The EFSA conducts all kinds of different foods, not just novel foods already, and they decide on authorization of marketing and whether your business is authorized to work. Yes?
So we've always done in this way a valid safety standard in any other industry?
Well, this safety standard encompasses not just an agricultural, but every part of the food industry. We've already applied this regulation, but not only this regulation, but we also have other regulations. So when we consider this, we can't only consider one regulation, as there are more regulations on food. For example, there is different regulations for vitamins, enzymes, and pesticides that I will all talk about later in my speech. Now, back to the refutal. It is wrong that there are no other ways to analyze our food. It is regulated. We analyze vitamins and we analyze enzymes and pesticides and whether they will go over the limit. Now, Traditional foods have existed for centuries, and they can also be assessed through other different regulations, and they also have different regulations that assess them. So it's inherently wrong that the novel foods is the only food that we have. Sorry, I will continue. As for the economy, my argument is not only about, but also explains why it won't be a good thing for the economy to have this. Now, I would like to begin my first argument. Foods already on the market are not unregulated. They are already subject to the EU General Food Law Regulation 178/2002, which requires that all food placed on the market must be safe. Producers are legally responsible for proving safety. There are strict hygiene and microbiological standards. There are binding limits on pesticides, contaminants, additives, enzymes, and flavorings, all assessed by EFSA. There is full traceability across the supply chain, and unsafe products can be removed immediately through the rapid alert system for food and feed. In other words, existing foods are continuously monitored through multiple layers of control. The novel food system would not add a new safety net. It would simply duplicate existing ones in a far more expensive and slower way. A single novel food authorization takes on average 18 to 24 months. The cost of preparing a food dossier ranges from 250,000 to 500,000 euros per product. At the same time, there are tens of thousands of food products already legally sold in the European Union. More than 90% of EU food businesses are small or medium-sized enterprises, many of them family-run. EFSA already operates under limited scientific capacity. Diverting experts to reassess foods with long histories of safe use necessarily reduces attention to emerging risks such as PFAS, microplastics, or new processing technologies. This policy overloads regulators, prices out small producers, and delivers zero marginal safety benefit. It violates the EU principle of proportionality and ultimately weakens the food safety system rather than strengthening it. That will be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your speech. So it lasted 6 minutes, 41 minutes. So good. So I'll give now the field to the second opposition speaker, Emanuele. Emanuele, please, you can start.
Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Hi everyone, I'm the second speaker of the proposition team, and today I'll first rebuttal what the first opposition team speaker has said, and then I'll develop our second and third argument. First of all, the opposition team has assumed that traditional food existed for centuries, and so it can be considered safe, but consuming doesn't equal safe. There are lots of unhealthy impacts that emerge on the long run, and science knows more today than yesterday, and it's rational to evaluate. Traditional foods were never tested for modern risks because before 1997 there was no endocrine disruption models, no epigenetics, no nanoparticle tracking, no cumulative exposure modeling, and so these foods are not proven to be safe. They were simply never examined. Then the first opposition team speaker has developed their argument, saying that this our model would cause at disproportionate economic harm because extensive food are continuously monitored, and there are the major part of business are small, and with our model we are not strengthening the system. We are causing more harms. But in reality, our model isn't too costly, and it will generate more benefits. Most of all, we have to say that collective healthcare costs, because there's obesity, diabetes, endocrine disorders that are significantly higher than our model, and then people buy more when they know the food they're buying is safe. So, because when consumers trust when consumers trust the safety system, because scientific assessments are done in advance, they are less likely to stop buying their product types after a recall. And so, at the end of the day, we have some impacts. For example, let me show some data. For example, industry data shows that an average food recall can cost a company from 8 million to 10 million, and so including logistic, lost sales, and legal expenses. And after contamination events, many consumers switch brands, further reduce revenue. By contrast, preventive assessment that this kind our model proposes reduce recalls by up to 20 to 30% and spread costs predictably over time. And okay, I have finished the rebuttal, and now I'll develop our second argument. It is that our model restores consumers' trust and strengthens the entire food chain economy, because according to Eurobarometer surveys, food safety is consistently one of the top consumer concerns in the EU, and trust sharply decreases after food scandals. And actually, consumers know that one, most foods on the market were never assessed by EFSA. Two, authorities intervene only after harm or suspicion arises. And third, safety is based on tradition and assumption, as the opposition team said, not modern science. And this creates a credibility gap, and when consumers stop trusting the system, they reduce consumption. Moreover, as documented by European Commission in post-crisis market analysis, consumers punish not only bad producers, but the entire supply chain, including honest companies. So the status quo creates systemic economic instability. And in this under low trust, there are some categories that loses. For example, both consumers who face uncertainty about which product is actually safe, and also producers, mostly small and medium companies, as they lack brand power to recover quickly. And with our model, consumers know that safety is verified before harm occurs. And according to the European Commission, high regulatory trust directly correlates with stable consumption patterns, stronger internal markets, and higher acceptance of innovation. And this is why the novel foods regime works. People simply trust it. We simply apply the same logic to all foods. So let's be clear, trust is an economic multiplier. Instead of sudden collapses caused by scandals, we get a stable demand. When consumers trust the safety system because scientific assessments are done in advance, they are less likely to stop buying at a packet, and so and then we have fewer recalls by identifying risk before it reaches consumers. Preventive assessment reduce the number of products requiring removal from the market. And third, we get lower long-term compliance costs. While upfront assessments cost money, they prevent expensive recalls, emergency risk management, and reputation damage, which impose far larger economic burdens on producers and authorities. I'll develop our third argument, that is mandatory safety reassessment drives innovation, because the current food safety system does not encourage innovation. It locks just the European food market into the past. Most foods currently on the EU market were approved decades ago and under weaker toxicological standards. And once a product entered in the market before 1997, it was effectively frozen in time. And so this creates what we call regulatory fossilization. So companies continue selling the same additives, preservatives, not because they are the best or safest option available today. And this creates a perverse incentive because people ask, why invest in innovation if an old chemical is legal forever while a new and potentially safer alternative must pass a costly and complex safety review? And instead, while all foods are required to meet modern safety standards, companies face a clear choice. Investing resources to prove that their old products are still safe according to today's science, or reformulating use cleaner, safer, and more modern ingredients that already meet current thresholds, which is often cheaper, faster, and easier to market. So it's obvious that many companies will choose reformulation. And crucially, this policy also creates a level playing field for innovators. And today, startups developing new food products must undergo strict safety assessment, while large corporations selling 40 years old products face no equivalent burden. That is not a neutral system, it is an actively anti-innovation. With our mandatory reassessment, everyone is held to the same scientific standards. This allows smaller, innovative firms to compete on quality and safety. So that is exactly how healthy innovation ecosystem works. You remove unjustified regulatory privilege and force competition on merit. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 8 minutes, 16 seconds. Okay, so I invite the third speaker of the proposition team. No, sorry. What happened? Oh, I got confused. Yes, so please, with my application, of course. So I invite Sophie Bisso, the second speaker of the opposition team, to take the field.
Okay. My speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Sophie Bisso, and I am the second speaker of the opposition team. I will begin now by refuting the proposition's points, and then I will present our second and third arguments. So, firstly, Speaker 1 of the proposition claimed that the policy protects the healthcare of the EU citizens. As Speaker 1 of our team, Sophie Varga, has already stated, this is not true, and our third argument, as you will then see, proves this, because when regulation becomes too expensive or too slow, which is exactly what this type of assessment does, people won't suddenly start eating safer food, but they usually tend to turn to unregulated markets because there will be a creation of a black market, putting at risk even more the healthcare of the EU citizens. The proposition also stated that many foods today aren't scientifically tested, but this actually supports our case, not theirs. If the system already struggles to assess everything, adding a massive new reassessment like the ESFA won't magically fix that, but will overwhelm even more that system. Speaker 2 then stated that just because traditional foods existed for centuries, it doesn't mean they're safe. But if people have eaten something for generations with not many patterns of harm, then that does actually tell us something. And pushing everything into heavy reassessment doesn't automatically make that food more safe either, because in fact, when the process becomes too expensive or too slow, then companies will tend to move outside of the legal system, and then that's where the real risk starts. I will now pass on to the second argument of the debate, that talks about the impact of mandatory novel food reassessment on traditional and culturally significant foods. Before discussing this, it is fundamental to understand the context. So across Europe, these foods are mainly that are then assessed by the ESFA are produced by small-scale operators and family businesses. These producers are the ones that play a fundamental role in preserving both culture and tradition that is present solely in regional cuisines. These producers, unfortunately, cannot afford the reassessment process as it is extremely expensive, as it requires toxicological studies and many scientific documentation. According to the European Commissions of 2021, a novel food dossier can cost between $250,000 to euros to 350,000 euros, a thing that only multinationals can absorb. Now, I ask you, do you really want to live in a world with no tradition where only the multinationals can afford these spending? And think, for example, about a small family-run cheesemaker that can't afford to spend that amount of money, and it is an impossible barrier for them. If mandatory reassessment is applied across Europe the same way as it has happened in the past, then the same dynamic will occur on a much larger scale. I will now pass on to argument 3, which assesses the extremely serious consequences of pushing food production into informal and black market channels, which is exactly what has happened also in the past. This is not just a risk, in fact, because thanks to research, we discovered that it has already happened in several Eastern European countries because strict regulatory assessments led to rapid growth in unregulated dairy and meat markets. In fact, seeing these products were cheaper to buy and more accessible, they lacked proper inspections, and foodborne illnesses were then caused, and this was not because consumers preferred unsafe food, but because the legal market had become inaccessible due to the high costs. This has also been proven by the OECD's 2018 regulatory policy outlook that has proven that when food regulations become too restrictive, informal markets will tend to grow, especially for smaller businesses that the ESFA is planning to address. The FAO has observed a similar pattern. In places where regulatory burdens suddenly increased, informal food markets expanded and hygiene standards suddenly dropped. This creates a higher risk of contamination than what these actually not on contrary of what the proposition team said. Informal markets operate outside an official oversight. Refute. Their production are not monitored by the rapid alert system for food and feed, so if contamination occurs, authorities cannot trace the source or issue the cause. So, mandatory novel food reassessment risks are creating these exact same conditions, if not worse. If small producers cannot afford compliance, they will either shut down, as we stated in argument 2, or move into informal channels, and of course then consumers may turn to unregulated sources, such as the black market. To conclude, the mandatory novel food reassessment does not achieve its intended purpose. Firstly, as we said in argument 2, it threatens traditional foods, which is exactly what we should be trying to avoid, because why would we want big multinationals to dominate the market? And they also tend to harm smaller producers and encourage the growth of unregulated market, leading to even further risks because, of course, in the black market, these foods are not checked. Instead of protecting consumers, in fact, it undermines both cultural heritage and food safety. Now, we think a world with this policy is a world, firstly, with less diversity, because we'd only have big multinationals that dominate, less fairness, and definitely less oversight. For these reasons, our team stands firmly against the motion. Thank you.
So your speech, and thank you for it, lasted 7 minutes 35 seconds. So now, actually, we go to the third constructive speeches. I invite Luca Pontrandolfo to take the field for the proposition team.
Yes, just a few seconds. Can you all hear me?
Yes. A bit of echo, but we can survive.
Yeah, it's the class. So
I know. Yeah.
my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, panel. The opposition first response to this problem was simple. We are used to doing in this way, but habit is not a safety standard. Tradition is not a scientific evidence, and familiarity has never prevented long-term harm. We were used to abscitos, we were used to leaded petrol, and we were used to trans fats, as the first speaker of my team stated briefly firstly. In every case, damage was discovered only after decades of exposure. Being used to something did not protect people. It delayed protection. This debate is not about banning traditional food or attacking culture. It is about whether food safety should be based on modern science or on outdated assumptions. Right now, only about 3% of the food we consume in the EU has undergone a full EFSA safety assessment. The remaining 97% is presumed safe unless evidence shows otherwise. In practice, that means authorities intervene only after people get sick, in large numbers, and only if that sickness can be legally linked to one specific food. This is not a health system. This is a legal lottery most consumers will always lose. Panel. If a medicine developed in the 1996 were still sold today without being tested for long-term side effects, we would immediately call it irresponsible. If a toy designed in 1996 still contained toxic paint, it will be banned without hesitation. Yet, when it comes to food, the one product we all consume every single day, we accept that the year it entered the market decides whether it deserves modern safety or not. That is irrationality at the core of the current system. This debate is not about tradition versus innovation. It is about whether public health policy should be based on modern science or on historical accident. The opposition has never justified why 1997 should be the line that separates protection from exposure. Under the current system, traditional foods are presumed safe unless proven otherwise. In practice, this means authorities intervene only after harm is observed, widespread, and legally traceable. This is not prevention, it is reaction. It is a system that protects people only after they are already sick, and even then, only if they can prove exactly which food caused the harm. This is why the opposition claim that traditional foods are safe because we have eaten them for decades fundamentally fails. Consumption is not evidence of safety. It is evidence of exposure. Most food-related harm is chronic, not acute. It develops slowly through long-term and cumulative exposure, not overnight, from one day to the other. Before 1997, there were no models for endocrine disruption, no epigenetic testing, no nanoparticle tracking, and no cumulative exposure analysis. Traditional foods were not proven safe under modern standards. They were simply never examined. The history of trans fats proves this point. They were legal and widely consumed for decades before science linked them to cardiovascular disease. By the time regulation intervened, millions had already been exposed. Tradition did not protect consumers, it delayed protection. Our model corrects this failure by shifting food safety from an ex-post system to an ex-ante one. Instead of waiting for people to get sick and then arguing about causation, we require scientific assessment. No, thanks, I'll take the PUIs later. We require scientific assessment before harm occurs. This is neither unrealistic nor chaotic. We do not test every product on shelves. We assess substances and production processes. And if thousands of products use the same additive, one assessment is sufficient. We also rely on the EFSA's existing risk classification, prioritizing high-risk foods first and implementing reform through a phased 5-year timeline. The opposition argues that this model is too costly. In the short term, there are costs, but the real question is who should pay for risk. Under the status quo, consumers pay with their healthcare system, pay with public funds, and honest producers pay when entire markets collapse after food scandals. One food recall costs companies between 8 and 10 million euros on average, excluding long-term reputational damage. Preventive assessment replaces unpredictable crises caused with stable, manageable compliance. Opposition also claims that policies will harm small companies and reduce innovation. In reality, the current system... Yes?
If protection is your priority, how does pushing all these small producers into unregulated markets make people safer?
Can you repeat your PI?
If protection is your priority, how does pushing all these small producers into unregulated markets make people actually safer?
Okay, I got your PI, and by finishing my speech, you'll get the answer. So, as I was saying, as the opposition speaker just asked to me with her POI, opposition claims that this policy will harm small companies, I think, and reduce innovation. In reality, the current system already disadvantages them. Today, startups must pay for EFSA assessment, while large corporations selling decades-old additives face no equivalent burden. That is not a neutral market, it is regulatory privilege. Our model removes that privilege by applying the same scientific standard to everyone. Large corporations must finally justify legacy substances, while innovative firms can compete on safety and quality rather than being undercut by outdated but legally protected products. This levels the playing field and encourages reformulation and safer innovation. And finally, let's talk about urgency. Even if economic benefits take time, health damages do not wait. Every year of delay exposes millions of consumers, including children and the elderly, to substances never assessed using modern science. Trust in the food system continues to erode, and each new scandal reinforces the perception that regulation is reactive rather than preventive. We already accept precaution in industries like medicine, aviation, and toys, for example, even when it increases costs. Food should not be the exception simply because its harms are slower or less invisible, or they harm that specific part of producers. At the end of this debate, the choice is clear. The opposition defends an outdated, reactive, and unequal system. We offer a phased, risk-based, scientifically grounded reform that prioritizes health, restores trusts, and ensures fair competition. So, for all these reasons, despite the short-term trade-offs, this House must act in this precise moment. And that is why we, as proposition team, we are proud to propose. Thanks.
Thank you for your speech, Luca. It lasted 8 minutes and 7 seconds. Well, now it's the turn of the third speaker of the opposition team. Sara Gorrino, please, your turn.
My speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sara Gorrino, and I'm third speaker for the opposition team. As a third speaker, I will begin by refuting the model that proposition team brought and proposed to us, and then I will do a rebuttal where I explain why my team, we believe that my team's claims are correct and fair to everybody. Starting by refuting, one of the first claims that Team Pro made with their first speaker is that the difference between novel and traditional foods is bureaucratic. This distinction, we say, is not actually bureaucratic, it's risk-based. As the regulation done in 2015 by the EU, it explicitly defines foods, novel foods, as these without a history of safe use before 1997. While traditional foods are backed by decades and centuries, as we said in the definition of our motion, and of real-world consumption and uses, which EFSA recognizes as valid safety evidence. Another claim we as a team don't personally agree with is that most foods we eat today are actually have actually never been scientifically tested. This is incorrect because existing foods are consistently tested and have already been assessed by the EU General Food Law. That is a regulation, an official regulation that controls hygiene, contaminant limits, pesticides, additives, and enzymes in foods. So all of which EFSA scientific risk assessments does not via the novel food route. It's basically the same thing, so it does not make sense to us to have another regulation for this because it already exists. Moreover, talking about the propositions team idea that we should reassess all foods within 5 years, we said that this is not actually possible. Your plan is impossible to do in 5 years because this operation takes to just control the novel foods assessment just 18 to 24 months. And there are tens of thousands of foods on the market. And you know this because you see them on the shelves when you go buy food at the grocery store. EFSA lacks the capacity to do this and to paralyze the system and delay action on real risks. Also, the cost on the short term, but also on the long term, is very high. As you said, especially in the short term, it's very high. And since we already have a way to check if foods are safe or not, we believe that we should put those investments into more serious things. And we're not saying that food control is not actually important, but we're saying that we already do that, and it would not make sense to just spend money and time and resources and workers on something that's already existing and that's been going on for years. Also, you claimed that this is about health justice and prevention. Well, we believe that as a team, health justice requires proportionate regulation. So, burdening small producers with 250,000 euros to 500k euros per year compliance costs reduces the costs of accessible foods. So as costs increase for checks, also taxes and foods prices will increase as well to undergo these prices. And this would lead even more, would add to the argument that Speaker 2 presented about black market. So foods, we have less types of foods and choice on the market. We have more time because it takes time to check foods and the price is higher. So what should people do? So that will create an enormous problem. Passing on to another claim that Speaker 3 made is that consumption is only evidence of exposure and not safety. We said that consumption is a way also to check if a food is safe, because that food's been consumed by for generations, and we did not have any type of risk. So this is why we believe that this claim is incorrect. In risk assessment, exposure without observed harm over long periods is how safety is actually inferred. So EFSA also explicitly recognizes history of foods as a safe way to check them through scientific evidence. So also EFSA considering this, and it's not a belief that me and my team made, like a claim that we made, but it's something that you can find on the regulation. Another point of clash we don't agree with is that traditional foods were never checked and they were not even tested. And that's misleading, because traditional foods are continuously tested, even today, also both directly and indirectly, through contaminant limits, microbiological standards, and pesticide residual monitoring, and also many inspections. So they were not refused because there was no plausible risk existed. Another example you made was about trans fats, the example of trans fats that show that we need scientific testing, not just shelf presence. But that's not a really good analogy, according to my team and I. This is because trans fats were identified through scientific research and then regulated under existing food law, without actually forcing all the foods into the novel system. And this proves the fact that risk-based regulation actually works. Moreover, your last claim was that your model would reduce privileges and promote equality, because all foods would be checked and there would not be some foods that are and foods that are not. But this is false framing. This is because the model advantages large corporations that can afford dossiers while excluding small producers. Small producers should stop selling because they would not have enough money to actually go through the EFSA in so little amount of time. So this is not equality. It's actually even worse. It's worsening the discrimination based on capital. So we believe that smart regulation targets risks, and the proposition targets everything. And in doing so, it actually protects nothing. We, as a position team, brought us arguments requiring the novel foods approval for existing foods that causes massive economic harm with no safety gain. This is what Sophie Varga said. And we also talked about economy and the black market that demonstrates the excessive and inaccessible regulation that foods productions and that drives food production into the black markets, where inspections are actually disappearing. So this is why me and my team are against the motion officially. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 8 minutes and 9 seconds. So we are over with the constructive speeches, and now it's time for replies. The first, let me see, Sophie Bisso for the opposition. And
just a moment. I have to go now.
Martina.
Thank you for the debate.
Oh, scusa. Sorry. You have to go now means?
Yes.
Emanuele, is it you?
I have to leave the class, but
Okay.
my
Your
account will
team is
remain
there.
because there is Martina.
Yeah, okay. Your choice, Martina Natuzzi, okay. Martina. Natuzzi. That's it. Okay, so please, I give the field to Sophie Bissou for the reply of the opposition team. You can start when you're ready.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, good morning, everyone. I returned to speak in order to conclude my team thesis and the debate that we have engaged in today. It has been a very stimulating and constructive debate, but and for this I would like to thank the opposing team and all of you for your attention, but it is now time to discuss what this debate was actually about and the 3 main controversies it has revolved around. So, the first controversy we found concerns whether mandatory reassessment is truly necessary to guarantee food safety. We believe it is a point where we discussed a lot, and on this point we have shown that EFSA already provides a scientific and reliable model for assessing risk. The proposition argued that many foods are not scientifically checked, but this does not justify creating a system that is a lot heavier, a lot slower, and a lot more expensive, a thing that we have repeated multiple times across the debate. A system that becomes overloaded does not protect citizens, but instead it creates delays and many gaps in oversight, which could lead to a further risk. We have demonstrated that safety comes from a functioning and an accessible model, not a model like the one in the proposition team that in fact cannot realistically manage the situation. The second controversy concerns the impact of this policy on traditional and culturally significant foods. Across Europe, as we said before in the debate, these foods are produced by very small-scale operator businesses who preserve a regional identity. The opposition suggested that tradition does not equal safety. But we never claimed that it did. What we argued is that food consumed for generations without any pattern of harm cannot be treated as inherently dangerous. And more importantly, the cost of reassessment is simply impossible for small producers, and this means that traditional foods risk disappearing, not because they are unsafe, but because the system cannot the small producers cannot handle this burden. And the evidence we presented clearly shows that the regulation rewards only those who can pay, and when this happens, cultural diversity is the first thing, so tradition is the first thing that vanishes. Finally, the third controversy concerns whether this policy protects public health or unintentionally pushes people into unregulated markets. The proposition insisted that stricter rules automatically mean greater protection. But we showed that when regulation becomes too heavy or too slow, producers will not magically adapt, as the proposition team said, but they will move outside the legal system and into the black market, and consumers will definitely follow them. This is not a speculation, it has already happened before, something that we've proven in our debate, and these products were cheaper and easier to access, but they lacked many inspections, creating even more risks. Ultimately, this debate has brought out diverse perspectives, but we are convinced that our position is well-funded and deserves consideration. We have shown that mandatory reassessment is not necessary for safety, and as it threatens traditional foods, and it risks pushing production into unregulated channels, which is not what we believe should happen. Thank you once again, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 4 minutes and 3 seconds. Good. So, well, I invite Martina Natuzzi to give the reply speech for the proposition team.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel. Today, we debated the motion. This House would require all foods already on the market to undergo the European Safety Assessment currently mandated for novel foods. We've been shown two very different versions of the word, and we found many disagreements. Firstly, I would like to say that as position, we think that this debate ultimately comes down to one question. Do we want a system that prevents harm or one that only reacts once harm is proven? In fact, we think that it's not about whether regulation has costs, but whether we accept preventable harm as a price of inaction. And while now the protection starts before mass exposures and incentives towards safety, index are installed later until it becomes undeniable. We found many points of clash. The main ones are certainly that of health and that of economy and innovation. I'll start with health. In fact, this says that it harms the general health of the EU population for various reasons. Firstly, they said that the tests are already there, so the third test wouldn't be needed. But we showed that the tests that are already been done are obsolete. In fact, science has improved, and that testing used for traditional foods is exposed, as we showed in the first argument. We showed how this is harmful. Then they said that this food has been consumed for centuries, but they didn't take into consideration the fact that consumption isn't proof of safety, as we showed in our speeches. Then we have the point of economics and innovation. In fact, they said that it would harm the economy, especially the small and medium companies. But we said that it wouldn't. It would improve the general economy because it would improve customer trust, which helps economy. In fact, trust is an economic multiplier. Then, because it costs more than assessment, and food scandals even harm small and medium companies. So this is the opposite of what they said. And then that even sanity costs caused by the illnesses, caused by this lack of assessments of tests, are higher than that of the assessments themselves. And also, this says that it would make our market uneven, but we show that it actually removes privilege, the privilege given to the companies that stay stuck in the past. In fact, while they say that it wouldn't help with innovation, we showed that instead it would, and plenty. So then they also said that in our model, the cost is too much, it would be too expensive, and that regulation would become too slow. But our system, the model we proposed, fixed that. In fact, we proposed to not do it all at the same time. So even if our model does have costs, those costs are predictable and reversible, while the harms in the position words are neither. This is why our model is not just safer, but fairer and more optional. And because of all these reasons, we are proud to propose these assessments, this motion. And with this, I end my speech.
Thank you. Your speech lasted 3 minutes, 42 seconds. So just okay. So thank you for this debate. Now the judges are going to a different room, and we'll see you in a short time, we hope. Okay? An applause.
Okay, thanks.